When I first came up with the X-Men, I thought it might be fun to get an analogy with the way some people are picked on by bigots. What if the human race is afraid of them, hates them perhaps, and prosecutes them?
So, the X-Men are one of Marvel's most premier and iconic teams. Ever since they were first created in 1963 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, these characters in this world have captivated audiences with their rich history, their stories, and their themes of acceptance and equality. For years, it was the Marvel comic alongside Spider-Man, with stories and characters capable of filling an entire world of its own. And for all of their faults, the Fox X-Men movies were revolutionary, defining the modern era of superhero movies. Part of why I enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine was that it was a love letter to that series that I grew up with, and I can't help but appreciate that. But they still had their fair share of issues. The quality ranged from some of the best superhero movies of all time, worthy of awards and universal praise for years to come, to X-Men Origins Wolverine. They were clearly ashamed of their source material. Landmark characters didn't get a spotlight, and not to mention the X-Men were sidelined in the comics and games because of the movie rights. And so when Marvel reacquired those rights in 2019, it opened the doors for those characters to be incorporated into their larger cinematic universe, where they could hopefully get the treatment that they deserve and skyrocket them back into the mainstream. There are some huge shoes to fill, and no way that everybody's going to be 100% happy with what they end up doing, but I think the perfect X-Men movie for me is one that focuses on the themes and ideas that make the X-Men who they are, and why they've held the test of time for so many years. An X-Men for a new era that showcases what makes these characters in this mythos so special, while leaving the door open for things to come. And so here's my pitch for X-Men Legacy, or Uncanny X-Men, or All New X-Men, or honestly, X-Men just works too. You know, I'm not picky. But before we get started, this video is brought to you by Doordash. With Doordash, you can have almost anything from your local neighborhood delivered, like food, flowers, retail items, and more, straight to your door. It's great for when you're running out of snacks at a party, or when you're sick at home and need medicine but can't go out, if you forgot something important while traveling, or even if you just want food but are too comfortable on the couch to go out. Listen, it's getting colder out. Nobody's gonna judge you. I have been working on this video for a very long time, like honestly the better part of like 2 years. This has sort of evolved into a pretty massive project that's taken over my life a little bit, and during the writing and editing process, having things like my dinner delivered through DoorDash has been a lifesaver. I've even discovered some great local spots in my area that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Even just the ability to get regular retail items that you need instead of having to leave the house, get in the car, wait in traffic, go into the store, find the thing, wait in line at the store, wait in traffic again, and then go home. It just shows up. Dare I say 50% of your life is spent waiting in traffic. With these videos, I don't really get a ton of time to myself, so I need to take all of that time that I possibly can to rest and give myself a bit of a break, and DoorDash has let me do that. Download the DoorDash app now to get almost anything delivered, and use code TroyOboyo2024 to get 50% off up to $10 on your first order of $15 or more for a limited time. Thank you so much to DoorDash for sponsoring this video, and thanks to my patrons for able to get all my videos early and ad-free for just $1 a month. We open in 1963. A massive, towering robot is slowly stomping its way through a jungle, its feet shaking the earth with every step. The technology is clunky and primitive, but still incredibly dangerous, designed with only one thing in mind: killing. There's a man on the ground below, sitting in a wheelchair and looking up at the killing machine. The robot locks onto the man, and its eyes flash red as it prepares to attack. But the man isn't afraid, as he says, "To me, my X-Men." Now, the first order of business is to answer the question, how do we get mutants in the MCU? It's probably the biggest challenge here, and is the result of Marvel selling the X-Men rights in the 90s and building this entire universe without them. And there are a lot of ways you could go about it. You could have it be through some big Infinity Stone event like the Snap, or have them pop over through the multiverse, or Scarlet Witch pulling a reverse House of M and going, no, comma, more mutants. But if you ask me, the X-Men need their history. So much of their stories are predicated on not just the historical oppression of mutants, but also landmark characters having existed through key points in history. You can't just have mutants pop up as an entirely new thing with the X-Men forming in the 2020s and expect to tell stories even remotely similar to the source material. And save for a full universe reboot in Secret Wars, I think the only way to do the X-Men justice is by taking that question and making it the driving narrative of this movie. And so we establish, either in the movies leading up to this, or as some grand phase, or in just a simple news broadcast for people who don't want to do homework, that mutants have existed for generations in the Marvel Universe, but they just weren't known about and were never given a name. Less than 2% of the population. They were just miracles, people born with special abilities. The MCU actually has set the foundations for this, funnily enough, with Ms. Marvel, but also characters like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who are the prime example of mutants but weren't allowed to be called mutants. WandaVision even implies that they had their powers as kids before they were fully activated. But now, in the modern day, seemingly out of nowhere, more and more of these miracles are popping up, and their numbers are growing at an alarming rate. Everyday people with the same X gene that's causing these abilities. And they've all started to collectively call themselves mutants. And we can establish that there were people who still knew about about the X gene and mutants' existence even decades ago, including Weapon X, Bolivar Trask Sr., and Charles Xavier, who assembled a team of heroes to protect mutants and keep them safe, called the X-Men. The team consists of Iceman, Angel, Beast, Jean Grey, and Wolverine. Hang on, Cyclops fans, I am on your side. Don't worry, I'm gonna get to them. And we get a scene showing off this team a little bit and seeing their dynamic. Maybe when they defeat the Proto-Sentinel, Jean could want to take a team photo together. Jean is the youngest member on the team at just 15, but she seems to care the most about what they're doing and about Xavier's mission. The Fox movies did Charles Xavier more or less pretty great. Sir Patrick Stewart was legendary, legitimately perfect casting aside from being an actual telepath, and the world thought that nobody could ever replace him. And then James McAvoy came in and did just as great of a job. So needless to say, the MCU has some pretty big shoes to fill when it comes to Xavier. We established that Charles created this team to support his dream of a better future, but for the time being, he's made it the X-Men's mission to, above all else, keep mutants' existence a secret. There's safety in secrecy. And that's what I want this story to focus on. The world is no doubt a cruel and dangerous place, especially for any member of a marginalized group like mutants. And some people might want to understandably hide away and shelter themselves from that to protect themselves, especially mutants who've lived so long in the shadows and now have the spotlight just thrust upon them. But is it worth it to stay a secret, all for some idea of safety? Is it worth it to hide who you are and sacrifice what makes you special? Above all else, this is a story about pride. In more ways than one. We cut to the modern day in Deerfield, Illinois, a suburb 25 miles outside of Chicago, where we meet a young girl named Kitty Pryde. You get it? You see what I did there? Pride, huh? All right, whatever. One of the core archetypes for an X-Men story, not just in movies, but even the comics, is having a point of view character. The X-Men's history is so rich and complicated, with so many characters to meet and so much exposition to be done, that you basically need an audience surrogate to introduce us to this world. The Fox movies tried using Rogue before they just became the Wolverine show, but you could also use Jubilee like the animated series did. I have a sinking suspicion that they're building Kamala Khan to be in that role, but I'd really love it for them to use Kitty Pryde, because I like Kitty, my girlfriend likes Kitty, and so we're going with Kitty, god damn it. Seriously though, Shadowcat is such a fun character that I never really see get much spotlight, despite her being such a prominent role in iconic stories, like Days of Future Past and the Claremont run as a whole. It would be such a fun change of pace from what the Fox movies did. Elliot Page was great, but even then, Kitty barely got any screen time outside of knocking out the Juggernaut bitch. Her powers are a ton of fun and can be used super creatively, and her inclusion also opens up avenues for other stories and character dynamics, like her relationship with Spider-Man in the Ultimate Comics. They were a really fun couple, like legitimately my favorite Spider-Man relationship outside of Mary Jane, and I'd love to see that get adapted on screen. We get introduced to Kitty and her life. She's 18 years old, lives with her mom and dad, and she's about to finish her senior year in high school. She's a little bit clumsy, things keep on slipping between her fingers, but she's pretty well liked and popular with her classmates and has the definition of what you call a normal life. One day, she goes to the mall and hang out with some of her friends, and while she's there, we catch glimpses of anti-mutant propaganda. Just little things, signs, graffiti, some offhanded remarks from people, and on TVs around the mall, we see reports of Robert Kelly being elected for Senate, all of which goes right over Kitty's head and she pays it no mind. When out of nowhere, she gets a splitting headache. She's had migraines before, but not like this. It's like her head is trying to rip wide open. Kitty tries to move, but her foot is stuck on something. No, not on something, in something. Inside the floor, like they're one and the same. And her whole body begins to sink. She tries to move, to pull herself out, but the more she struggles, the more she sinks. Further and further. First her legs, then her chest, all the way up to her neck. She looks up as the entire mall is watching her in horror. She sinks further until the floor starts to cover her mouth, and she lets out a blood-curdling scream. We hard cut to the next day as she sits in class. Only 2 weeks left before the end of her senior year, and things are wrong. Nobody says anything, but it's like the whole world is staring at her, whispering behind her back about how she had to be rescued from the mall basement. Even her friends are ignoring her. Small towns talk, and word spread quickly about what happened, about Kitty Pryde being different, one of them. She gets called out of class into the guidance counselor's office. Kitty had had good grades most of her life and was accepted into a pretty well-respected college with a solid scholarship, or at least she thought so. The counselor tells her that in light of some new information, Kitty's scholarship and her admittance as a whole is being revoked. The school didn't disclose what happened, but Kitty doesn't think it's a coincidence this is happening today. She's outraged. She tries to fight it, but the counselor says that there's nothing anybody can do about it. There are no regulations in place to protect people like her. After school, she walks home as it begins to rain. She walks past more and more anti-mutant propaganda. Now she can't avoid it. On TVs, we see a speech given by Senator Kelly, who's pledging to stop this mutant agenda from taking their kids. As she walks, we cut to a pair of shadowy figures watching her from a distance. One of them, a woman, says that the girl looks distressed. Maybe they should talk to her now. But the other one says to wait, to keep their distance and stay in the shadows. It's what the professor told them. Through the binoculars, we see her pass a group of anti-mutant radicals, some of them from her school. As she passes, they whisper something to each other. It starts to rain harder and harder. Kitty cuts through an alley as a shortcut to try and stay dry, and the group follows her. They call out to her, her, hooting and hollering, saying that she's one of them. She tries to ignore them and just go home, but they cut in front of her and surround her, getting in her face. Some of them have weapons, pipes, bats, knives, and they intend to use them. That's when there's a voice. Leave her alone. They turn to see a man no older than his early 20s wearing a black leather jacket and a yellow visor over his eyes. The group begins to laugh at him at first, telling him to mind his own business, but he won't budge. He puts his finger to his visor as one of them lunges at him with a bat, and a blast of red energy shoots out of his eyes, slamming the attacker into the wall. The group looks in disbelief, and the man smirks. The stranger fights off the group on his own, using his I-beams not just as attacks with surgical precision, but also for his movement, even ricocheting the blast off of nearby surfaces. The last one manages to get a lucky hit in and knocks off his visor. He shuts his eyes tight, trying to protect Kitty from any collateral damage, but he's knocked to the ground by another blow. Before the attacker can get another hit in, the clouds above them swirl and darken, and a small bolt of lightning falls from the sky and strikes the attacker, knocking him out cold. In the alley stands a woman with dark skin and hair like lightning. She helps the man stand and returns his visor. He puts them on and glares at her. He's fine. It was just a little one. With the attackers defeated, Kitty tries to thank the strangers, but they disappear without another word. The rain begins to clear up and Kitty rushes home. In the living room, she finds both of her parents as well as someone sitting with them, a bald man in a wheelchair drinking a cup of tea. The man introduces himself to Kitty as Charles Xavier. He's a professor from upstate New York. There's a knock on the door and Kitty opens it to see the two strangers from the alley. And right on time, these are his associates, Aurora Monroe and Scott Summers. But it seems like they've already met. Xavier tells Kitty's parents about what's going on with her, how Kitty's X gene was activated, giving her the ability to move through solid matter, but also that he runs a school, the Charles Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters, whose sole mission is to help mutants like Kitty. Kitty's mom asks Xavier if he himself is a mutant, to which he says no, he isn't. He's just someone who wants to help those in need. Xavier offers Kitty a place at the school with a full scholarship. She looks to her mom, but having just turned 18, it's entirely her decision. But there she'd get top-tier education, a chance to learn to control her abilities, but also a place to be safe from those who may not be as welcoming. All Kitty wants is for things to go back to normal, to live a regular life, powers or not. But with nowhere left to go, with no friends, in a world that won't accept her, this might be the only chance she has. And Kitty agrees to their offer. At the school, Kitty starts training to control her powers. She's getting more comfortable with them, but they're still not perfect. She's able to pass through simple things like walls and floors, but nothing complex, and she's not able to bring anything with her just yet. And it's while she's there where we get formally introduced to the other students. The hardest part of a video like this is picking the team. There are so many important characters to the X-Men mythos, all with different ties and relationships, and that's what makes them so special. The X-Men shouldn't be treated like your average superhero team, but instead like a soap opera. They're all flawed, messy people, and they have to navigate their complicated lives all while dealing with prejudice and trying to be superheroes. And so because of that, I don't think anybody's ever really going to be 100% happy with the team they end up going with, and I'm not going to satisfy everybody with this video. So I'm going to be totally honest, I'm putting my favorites on the team. So if I didn't include your favorite character, it's because your favorite character sucks. No, I'm kidding. Starting with Scott Summers' Cyclops. I mentioned it before, but Cyclops was absolutely wasted in the Fox movies. It's probably one of their biggest mistakes, throwing away pitch perfect casting like James Marsden. I didn't hate Ty Sheridan by any means, but he also didn't really get much to do. It's easy to oversimplify Scott and paint him as some Boy Scout who's getting in the way of the cool guy Wolverine. But in reality, I think he's so much cooler than people give him credit for, and it really excites me that X-Men 97 reminded people just how great he really is. Like, just from that opening scene alone, I knew my boy was getting some love. For these movies, I want them to take inspiration from my favorite version of the character, and that's the one from X-Men Evolution. Honestly, that show had like all my favorite versions of the characters, like Scott and Rogue and Kitty and Logan, and oh my god, Christopher Judge as Magneto is the coolest casting ever. That show portrayed Scott as younger, like the rest of the characters, as most of them were in high school, but not just that, he had a bit more of an edge to him. He was angrier with more attitude, but still that Boy Scout heart. And I want this movie to do something similar. He's Xavier's golden boy, basically handmade since he was a kid to be the perfect leader, but that's led to so many expectations of him. He has a lot of daddy issues and unresolved trauma, and so he idolizes Professor X, sees him as a father figure, even to a fault. I understand that Scott's role on that original X-Men team is very vital to his character, but I also think that aside from making him 90 or just starting with that original 5 and going from there, you know, taking 20 years to get to Wolverine, this might be the best way to go about it and give him that spotlight. Another character who I think got totally wasted in the Fox universe is Storm, and I want her to be a forefront here. Aurora was a character with so much rich history and such an important role in the team, and yet those movies mainly just sidelined her as a supporting character and didn't really give her any agency outside of a few moments.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning. The same thing that happens to everything else.
And so here I think is the perfect opportunity to highlight this amazing character and showcase her as the leader and the powerhouse that she really is. I think there could be this really interesting arc where Aurora is forcing herself to hold back all the time, mainly because Xavier told her to, because he's worried about staying secret and Storm's the literal definition of flashy. But after years of holding all that in and bottling it all up, it eats away at you. Her power is a part of her identity, who she is, and that's no way to live. And so I would want her to, over the course of the movie, realize that she is her strength, and it's not something to be afraid of. No matter what anyone tells her, she is a goddess. And the last member we're introduced to at Xavier's school is Gambit. I fucking love Gambit. He's honestly one of the biggest reasons why I like Deadpool and Wolverine so much. No joke, before that movie started, I turned over to Olivia and I was like, babe, I'm not gonna cheer for the cameos. And then the second I saw that deck of cards, I became the worst version of myself. Channing Tatum's role in that movie sparked a lot of debate on whether we should see him finally get that solo Gambit movie. And while I really loved him in that movie, and I'm glad he finally got his chance to play that character that I love so much, I really don't think that's necessary. I think the point of those cameos was that they were forgotten and ignored, and their inclusion was them trying to find meaning and get their ending. And so just taking the most popular one and making him MCU canon would sort of feel like it undermines those themes. But Remy does deserve a spotlight, especially after being basically non-existent in the Fox movies. And so I'd still want to put Gambit on the team and give him a solid role here. I know I'm like explaining a lot of exposition right now. The movie would not do that. Like this is a YouTube video, so I can't really like show don't tell because I'm literally, you know, talking to you. During her training, Kitty comes across an old photograph in Xavier's office, tattered and worn, with the professor as a young man and 5 other people who she doesn't recognize. When she asks him about it, he quickly changes the subject. But after some badgering, Scott eventually tells her. When the school was founded in the 60s by Xavier, it was more than just a school or a safe haven, but a front for something else. A covert Black Ops team whose mission was to protect mutant kind. They called themselves the X-Men. They operated for a handful of years, fighting back against dangerous mutants and keeping their existence a secret, before one day disappearing off the face of the earth. Scott doesn't know what happened, nobody does, and the professor won't tell anybody. But something forced the team to disband, and it's been a mystery ever since. Kitty instantly becomes enamored with the idea, but before she can ask any more questions, Aurora steps in and calls them into the other room to see what's on the TV. The newly inaugurated Senator Kelly is holding a surprise press conference to announce a new initiative. During Kelly's election, he ran on an almost exclusive anti-mutant platform. Posters, speeches, attack ads, all with one singular message. And the people voted for it, overwhelmingly so. Jeez, I've been working on this video for a very long time. That kind of hits different now, doesn't it? Probably the most important and defining feature of the X-Men characters is the mutant metaphor. The idea that mutants are an allegory for the struggles of real-life marginalized communities, and the story of the X-Men directly relates to those struggles and that oppression. It is not perfect, and by no means is a good representation for the struggles of every single person simultaneously, and it has some inherent flaws that break apart when you examine it too closely and too literally, just like any allegory. And I've seen some people say that for that reason, the allegory should be abandoned entirely. But if you ask me, it's this metaphor and that approach that makes the X-Men different and stand apart from everyone else in the Marvel Universe. If you take the mutant metaphor out of the equation, you're resorting the X-Men to nothing more than just another superhero team, with the only thing that makes them different from the Avengers is just the fact that Wolverine is on it. Yes, it is hypocritical that humanity would embrace a team of superheroes like the Avengers with open arms, and yet the X-Men and mutants get protested and harassed in the street. It does not make sense for people who get their abilities from freak accidents like Fantastic Four to be famous and beloved, but people born with them are seen as monsters. But to me, that hypocrisy is the point. Despite how often the people who perpetrate it try and say so, bigotry isn't rooted in logic or facts, but in hatred and fear and oppression. And in fact, I think the stories should lean more into that hypocrisy when it comes to these movies. I want to see the smear campaigns and the fear-mongering of the X-Men that they only get because they're mutants, and the direct comparison to heroes who, by all means, are no different than they are. The leaps in logic and the shifting of the goalposts that these fear-mongers and grifters use to continue their narrative. Senator Kelly announces that he's partnered with Trask Industries and Bolivar Trask Jr. Using recently uncovered plans by his father from the 1960s, Trask has invented a new machine with the ability to detect mutants, even ones who haven't had their X gene activated yet. They claim that their intentions are not to hurt these mutants, but instead just to create a database, a registry, just to keep people safe. But we all know where that leads. I also want to explore what the X-Men represent for mutant kind as a whole, especially now in this era where more and more people are having their X genes activated and surrounded by a world that hates them and fears them, and that right now, they need the X-Men. A team to keep that hope alive, for mutants to know that someone is looking out for them, to give them a reason to keep fighting and know that they're not alone in this world. But Kitty doesn't quite see that yet, and she has a different vision for the X-Men. She looks at the photograph, a team of mutant superheroes who could show the humans of the world that mutants aren't to be feared or hated, just like the Avengers. And maybe, just maybe, it could mean things going back to normal, her getting her life back. But when she brings the idea up to Professor Xavier, he shoots it down immediately. Mutant kind has been able to stay alive for generations because of its ability to stay hidden. Mankind can't hate what it doesn't know, and despite Senator Kelly's dangerous rhetoric and the claims of this machine, this too shall pass. Again, there's safety in secrecy. Aside from a few quiet reconnaissance missions when necessary, the mansion serves only to teach and to protect. The X-Men will never return. End of discussion. One thing I'd really want this movie to explore is that Professor X is a flawed person. It was something that the original movies didn't really touch too much on. A lot of times he was portrayed as this beacon of hope and peace, the quote-unquote right way to do things. But the Professor is by no means perfect, and in fact, a lot of his stories come from his personal failings and poor decisions. He's not some terrible, abusive person or anything, he very much has good intentions, but he's a character with an ironic sense of naivety. Despite being this genius-level telepath with a machine that can literally let him see things all over the planet, he doesn't have the perspective or the worldview to make decisions for all of mutant kind. He doesn't have the experience to truly understand what it means to be marginalized and lacks that sense of intersectionality. I mean, hell, it wasn't until 2001 that him being a mutant became public knowledge to the Marvel Universe. For nearly 40 years, people just assumed Charles Xavier was just a very vocal ally. And so I want to really explore those personal failings and character flaws in this movie. Not paint him as some monster, but instead someone with good intentions who has made some mistakes and has to be willing to admit them and move on. That this safety and secrecy mantra that he's been living by for all these years is not the solution to coexistence and will eventually lead to the destruction of his people. Basically, I'm just doing this. Like, honestly, this sums up like 90% of the video. We cut to a living room as a man watches the same news broadcast of Senator Kelly and his announcement. Those words, the fear-mongering, the hate, the bigotry, the door-knocking, the calls for violence, it all leads to the same place: eradication. He's heard it all before, and he won't let it happen again. Charles stops dead in his tracks. Storm checks on him and asks what's wrong. He says, "Someone I once called friend. I can't sense him anymore." Storm asks, "Is he okay? Is he dead?" Worse, he's back. If you ask me, Magneto is the most important character to get right. He's someone who single-handedly witnessed the death of his entire family and the near eradication of his people. And now, as the world turns against mutants, he sees the signs before anyone else and does everything in his power to protect them, even if that comes at the cost of those who want to harm him. I've seen the argument that the MCU can't connect Magneto to his history in the 1940s because it would make the character nearly 100 years old. And so instead, they should just ignore it or swap it out with a different tragedy. And I hate this argument. Personally, swapping out tragedies is just a bad, slippery slope to go down. It implies that some are worse than others, especially when we're just talking about comic book movies. And there are a million ways you can justify Magneto's age. You could do what X-Men Evolution or the comics did and have him de-age himself. Or honestly, you could just say he has a secondary mutation that slows his aging. Same for Charles. It really doesn't matter the explanation, but removing Magneto's ties to such a dark point in history would be such a travesty to his character and his motivations and what makes him so special. Seriously, it's him and it's Dr. Doom. And we all know what's going on with the other one. You can't mess this up. We get a flashback to the early 60s where we see the original X-Men team facing off against Magneto. I want these flashbacks to really lean into the campy style. It should almost feel cartoony, painting him as an outright villain so we can break that down later. Magneto should feel like this massive, overwhelming presence of power and strength. The Fox movies focused a lot on Charles and Eric's relationship, and I think these movies should do the same. Because general audiences are already pretty familiar with it after 20 years of seeing it on screen, I think it'd be fun to throw us right in the middle of it all. The timing with Senator Kelly's announcement isn't a coincidence. And knowing Magneto, Charles can only assume what he has planned. An assassination attempt would place a bigger spotlight on mutants and put everybody in jeopardy, and so he readies the Blackbird. Cyclops will lead a team of Storm, Gambit, and Shadowcat to track down Magneto, gain intel, and prevent him from killing Senator Kelly. Kitty may not be able to control her powers fully, but she's able to be covert and get into places without detection. They are to do this quickly and quietly, and not draw any unwanted attention to themselves. Charles warns them that Magneto is dangerous. His methods destroy everything he touches. He can't be trusted. and he has to be apprehended at any means necessary. One thing I really want to focus on is this idea that Charles isn't treating the X-Men like superheroes, but more like some super classified Black Ops squadron. And it can be sort of a meta commentary on the Fox movies and their reluctance to lean into that comic bookiness of the source material. Maybe they're all wearing the black and yellow jackets from Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley's new X-Men run from 2001, which are some of my favorite designs for the characters and were heavily influenced by those Fox movies. And maybe Kitty could make a little joke about it and poke fun at them, saying she thinks they look better in something colorful or spandex, aha, wink wink. The X-Men take off in the Blackbird, on their way to DC, which is where they're assuming Magneto will go. As they're flying, they see reports all over the news about a mutant that's been running from local law enforcement in the island of Madripoor. They can't get a good look at him, but all they know is he has a pair of metal claws. Kitty remembers the photograph and the short, hairy guy with claws and instantly makes the connection: the Wolverine. She tells Scott that they should try and find him. He might be in trouble, and he could tell us what happened to the old X-Men. But Scott stops her. Charles gave them an explicit order, and he intends to follow it. But Aurora, wanting Scott to stop trying to be a Boy Scout for once, says that an original X-Men member could be the key in helping to defeat Magneto. Besides the Professor, Wolverine is the only one around who's faced him before. He knows how he thinks. Charles is clearly still hurt from what happened to the original team, which is why he won't talk about it, and he would never approve of them trying to find Wolverine. But as the leader, Cyclops has to do what's best for the team and the mission. Scott begrudgingly agrees, and without telling the Professor, they change their course for Madripoor. We cut to a small village in Germany. An angry mob screams and yells, carrying pitchforks, torches, made of young and old, chasing after something. A figure in the night, disappearing and reappearing across the small town's rooftops. A mutant with yellow eyes, a devil's tail, and skin made of blue fur. This scene is ripped right out of Len Wein and Dave Cockrum's Giant Size X-Men, which I'm taking a lot of inspiration from for this story, and for good reason. Giant Size was the book that literally saved the X-Men, and I'm not being hyperbolic about that. In the late 60s, X-Men sales were so bad that Marvel stopped producing new stories in 1970, and for 5 years, all X-Men comics were just reprints of the original Lee and Kirby stories. It was, for all intents and purposes, a dead book. And so then in 1975, when Len Wein and Dave Cockrum came in with Giant Size, it was a breath of fresh air for the series, with new characters and entirely new direction that got people reading again. It introduced a new X-Men squad who was forced to investigate the disappearance of the original Lee and Kirby team, with new and iconic characters like Colossus, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler, and completely revitalized the book. If it weren't for this one comic, the X-Men as we know them today would not exist. It was a story about the legacy of the old and the dawn of a new. And not to mention, it directly led into Chris Claremont's run on the title, probably the most popular X-Men run ever made that spun countless adaptations. And so I'd want to show some love to that here, maybe even make the poster a variation of that iconic cover. By the way, if you want X-Men comic recommendations, I'm going to give you the perfect reading order. You read Giant Size, and then Claremont's run, then jump to my personal favorite, Grant Morrison's new X-Men, and you read everything after that until you get bored, and then you jump to Jonathan Hickman's stuff with Krakoa, and then you just read from there until now, and then there you go. Simple as that, you're caught up on X-Men. Nightcrawler manages to escape the mob, but there's a sound off in the distance. It's some kind of drone? It flies up to Kurt, and on the side it says Department of Damage Control. He breathes a sigh of relief. Damage Control is one of the good guys, made by Iron Man. He's safe now, and a net shoots from the drone and pins Kurt to the ground. He tries to teleport away, but it creates an electric field that dampens his mutation. A pair of DODC officers run up to Nightcrawler and handcuff him before taking him away as the crowd below cheers. One of the things I really liked about Ms. Marvel was how it took Damage Control and basically turned them into the antagonists. And I wouldn't hate if the DODC was used as a stand-in for an anti-mutant government program in the future, establishing that it's being run by Senator Kelly now, who's been using the original vision of safety and protection as an excuse to detain and capture mutants all over the world. Something that was built by Tony Stark has now been co-opted by bigots and tainting that legacy. The Blackbird lands in Madripoor, and they get a call on the communicator from the Professor. He was tracking their location and wants to know why they've changed course so much. Scott doesn't have the heart to lie to the Professor, and so he starts stammering. But Aurora jumps in and tells Charles that they found new reports that Magneto has been heading to Madripoor and not DC as expected. Or maybe she says it's something to do with the weather, because, you know, that's like her thing. Charles is skeptical at first, but with no reason to mistrust his team, he buys into it. The X-Men track this mysterious clawed mutant down to a bar deep in the city. They enter and see that all of the patrons from the bar have either run away or have been knocked out cold. And sitting at the bar is not Logan, but instead a young girl, Laura Kinney. I'm not gonna lie, I've been trying to make this video for a while, and this felt like it'd be a much bigger deal before Deadpool Wolverine, and I thought I'd have to really fight for this, but now it doesn't feel like that crazy of a reveal. When she was a kid, Logan helped Laura escape from Weapon X and break her out of her brainwashing. He helped her overcome the pain and the trauma of those experiments, and he became like a father to her. But a few years ago, he went missing. It's like he disappeared off the face of the earth with just a note saying he was going away for a while, and Laura has been trying to find him ever since. Wolverine is easily the most popular member of the X-Men, like it's not even a question. And for years, X-Men media treated him like he was the main character, especially the movies, which sidelined other major players like Cyclops to prop prop up Logan. It became the notion that the X-Men as a team and as a franchise could not sell without Wolverine. And so for these movies, I kind of want them to differentiate themselves a little bit and put some distance between the Fox movies and take a break from him on the main team for a while. Before you Logan fans get mad at me in the comments, we would not be ignoring him, don't worry. I do still want to see a new take on the Logan character, ideally from an actor that's not tall enough for Space Mountain. I liked Hugh Jackman, but I don't think he was such perfect casting that nobody else could play the character. And so you could give Logan a solo movie or a TV show or something like that to show his story and what he's been up to. At least for now, I don't really want to see him on the mainline X-Men team. But I also think that it would be a bad decision to completely forgo the iconography of Wolverine on the X-Men. And so having Laura could really be a great way to pull a Hannah Montana and get the best of both worlds. A representation of not only classic and traditional X-Men, but also the modern age and future stories too. As for Laura's casting, you could go with someone new, or it would be fun to have Daphne Keane come back since she didn't really get a ton to do in Deadpool. Especially if they actually do end up keeping Hugh Jackman until he's 90. You've already built their relationship, so there's a little less to cover. And maybe she and this new younger Scott butt heads a little bit, and we can still have that classic Wolverine and Cyclops dynamic, just now without that love triangle that I'm honestly really sick of. My hot take is that the best Wolverine was the one from Evolution, where he was just like a dad to all these people. I know there's a lot of discourse about whether or not Laura should even be Wolverine. I'm personally strongly in the camp that she is. Tom Taylor's run on All New Wolverine from 2016 is some of my favorite Wolverine stuff, period. And so you could literally lean into that with Laura's arc. Kitty tells Laura that there's an open spot on the team for her. You know, it's not the X-Men without a Wolverine, but Laura refuses, saying that she wants to put all of her effort into finding her dad. And besides, she doesn't really think she's worthy of that name to begin with. As they're talking, we see dozens of DODC drones and agents start circling the bar, having tracked Laura down the same way that the X-Men did. The DODC attacks and Laura fights them off, leading them out of the bar and through the streets of Madripoor. It might be fun if we keep flashing back and forth between her and an old fight with Logan from the 60s to really show how alike they are. Kitty wants to step in and try and help, but Scott won't let her. Xavier wanted them to stay secret, and they can't get involved and risk getting captured. He doesn't like it either, but it's what the professor wants, and he's going to follow orders. But Gambit, being the gentleman that he is, says fuck that noise and tries to help her anyway. They fight off as much as they possibly can, but they're outnumbered and overpowered. The two of them get captured by one of the drones and taken away. With no other choice but to save their teammate, Scott and the others follow them to a DODC facility a few miles off the coast. A mutant prison, one of dozens on the planet. More drones and ships flying in, carrying captured mutants from all over the world. Scott feels guilty that it was his fault that one of their own got captured under his watch, and he's starting to doubt the professor's methods. He's going to make sure that they save them, but they have to be smart about it. And it all revolves around Kitty. She can use her phasing to sneak into the prison and find a way to free Remy and Laura. She still hasn't been able to fully control her powers yet, but Scott trusts that she can do this, and he gives her an earpiece so that she can communicate with the rest of the team. Kitty sneaks in and is able to stay undetected while she looks for Laura in Gambit's cells. That's when she realizes it's not a prison, it's a factory. Mutants from all over the world, exhausted and trembling, wearing collars that inhibit their abilities, forced to build something. Machines with only one singular purpose: killing mutants. And they're called Sentinels. We learn that Trask and Senator Kelly have been building these Sentinels in secret, using the captured mutants to fuel their research. Trask Jr. used his father's old designs and his master mold from the 60s as a base, but updated them with modern weapons and technology to be more effective and more dangerous. They've been waiting to get more private funding, and there's now enough public fear of mutants, and they have enough working prototypes completed to showcase their effectiveness in a live demonstration in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. While they're trapped together, maybe this could be a chance to explore some more about Laura's character and go deeper into Remy's backstory. I think it would be really interesting if Gambit represented somebody who used to want to be one of the good ones. Before being taken in by Xavier and as a member of the Thieves Guild, maybe he used to sell out mutants, put his people in jeopardy in the name of saving his own skin. And he carries this guilt over that to this day, and he wants to make amends for it. But now seeing all of this at the prison and what he put his people through is bringing that back to the surface. He wants to prove he can be a better person, but right now he doesn't have that guiding star that is Rogue in his life, and so he's not really sure where to start. As Kitty's making her way through the prison, she comes across a mutant with blue fuzzy skin and a tail sitting in a cell. Nightcrawler is one of my favorite members of the X-Men. He's such an interesting character, the devout Catholic who looks like a devil and all the baggage that comes with that. But the fuzzy little guy never lets that bring him down, and he always stays hopeful and sees the good in people. He represents a side of mutants that doesn't normally get a lot of love in X-Men stories. Traditionally, we see the ones who are able to keep their mutations a secret, but there's a whole population of mutants who aren't so lucky. Those whose X genes manifest in physical ways that they can't control, who see their gift as more of a curse. And so Nightcrawler is the personification of those mutants who quote-unquote lost the lottery, the ones who can't hide in the shadows and realistically would be targeted first. And I think it'd be a really interesting story to see Kurt come to the realization that he can be a beacon of hope for those like him. Maybe at first Kitty is scared of Kurt before he eventually calms her down, and Kurt tells her that all of the cells are lined with a mutation dampening energy field, which is why he's not able to teleport out. And if she wants to save her friends, she won't be able to phase them through. It's honestly a miracle that she made it this far. There's a breaker outside the prison where if it got overblown, it would shut down power for a couple of minutes, just long enough for all the cell doors to open and cause enough of a distraction and free not not only Gambit and Laura, but also Kurt and everyone else in the prison. Kitty relays this back to the team, and Storm fries the system, and there's a whole scene where the entire factory is in pure chaos, and Kitty, alongside Kurt, uses the distraction as a way to find Laura and Remy and get out of there. And this could also be a good chance to showcase that Storm, even now, is still holding herself back. And on the flip side, Scott could use this opportunity to really let loose, in a way relishing the chance to actually fight for once. Maybe he takes off his visor and we get to see just how powerful his optic blast can be.
Yeah? You want a raw tough guy? Then take it raw!
Okay, maybe not like that. Kitty regroups with the others and they try to make a break for it back to the Blackbird, but they end up getting cornered by dozens and dozens of armed DODC officers. The officers are about to shoot to kill, but out of nowhere a hum fills the air and their guns fly out of their hands into the sky, where we see him, a man in a purple cape with a metal red helmet. He closes his fist and the weapons crumple into scrap. He's finally arrived. Magneto. The guards run away in fear, and the X-Men get ready to face their greatest enemy. Scott even shoots an optic blast at Magneto, but he deflects it like it's nothing. He's not here to fight. On the contrary. Instead, he tells Cyclops to return to their ship and follow him. They fly for hours until they come upon a small island off the coast of Madagascar, called Genosha. We learn that this entire time, Magneto was never planning on killing Senator Kelly. As much as he may have wanted to, he had other plans. For decades, Magnus has been building New Genosha, this community of mutants free from the pressures of man and the rest of the world, entirely in secret. And even members of Xavier's original X-Men like Warren Worthington, Bobby Drake, and even Hank McCoy have made this place their home. It may not be much, but here they've been able to survive and even thrive without the prejudice of man. One thing I want to do after building up Magneto for this entire time is showcase that when we meet him today, he's a shell of the man he used to be. I think that Magneto, despite having such different methods than someone like Xavier, still operates on a hope that mutants can eventually live freely. But now he's lost that hope, that spark that used to drive him. And we're not sure why yet. He makes a comment to Storm, telling her that he can sense so much power within her that she's been holding back her entire life, maybe one of the strongest that he's ever seen, and that she's truly magnificent. Aurora fully expects him to tell her that she needs to keep that power in check, to keep that side of her hidden like she's been told for so many years, but no. Instead, he tells her that she should be proud, showcase that power and that strength to the world, and if the world fears her for it, then so be it. But Kitty is frustrated with Magneto. For as powerful of a mutant as he's supposed to be, someone who would fight for mutants no matter the cost, he spent the past 60 years just living on an island in secret, picking and choosing who to help instead of standing up for their people. This is no different than what Charles is doing with his safety and secrecy motto. He's not proud to be a mutant, he's not helping anyone. He's a coward. Magnus looks at this girl and he says, "So I see. Charles never told you what happened to the X-Men." We learn that everything that they know about mutants has been a lie. Years ago, their people were not in hiding. The entire world knew of their existence, including the X-Men, and the island of Genosha was a thriving, bustling community. Thousands and thousands lived here. They still faced hate from the rest of the world, but here they were proud. They had art, music, culture. It was a true paradise. And despite their disagreements, Charles and Magnus were able to stand side by side with one another. Eric was even able to start over, build a family. But then, one day in 1970, disaster struck. Bolivar Trask Sr., under direct permission from the US government, attacked the island of Genosha with an armada of Sentinels, the likes of which they had never seen before. The X-Men, Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants, and the Hellfire Club teamed up to defend themselves, but thousands were killed, including Magneto's family, and it would have been more if not for one mutant, Jean Grey. She was just a young girl, not much older than Kitty is now. For years, Magnus had faced off with her and the rest of the X-Men, and he always knew that she was the core of the team, the heart that kept them going and gave them the hope that they needed to keep fighting. But on that day, something changed within her, a force that Magneto had never seen before, the Phoenix. And with that power, she was able to single-handedly defeat the Sentinels, disappearing into a massive ball of light and fire. After weeks of searching, nobody could find her, and they could only assume the worst, that she had sacrificed herself to save Genosha. But the humans didn't stop. Now knowing how powerful someone like the Phoenix could be, that scared them even more. And so they sent attack after attack after attack, each time taking out more and more innocent mutant lives in the process. And so Charles did something. In his grief, in his fear, he did the unthinkable. He powered on Cerebro, supercharging his psychic abilities, and went into the minds of every single living person on the planet, and he made them forget. Not just Genosha, not just the X-Men, but all of mutant kind in their history. The X gene as a concept, as a discovery, was completely erased. Even mutants themselves forgot who and what they were. Those born with powers were just considered miracles and nothing more. The remaining members of the original team disbanded, went their separate ways, and continued on with their lives, never to speak of it ever again. Coexistence had proven to be a failure, to be impossible, and so now the only safety is in secrecy. And it wasn't until decades later that the words mutant or X gene were uttered ever again. All of Magneto's work was lost. Everything he had fought for, all of the lives lost, their community, their family, their pride, it was all gone. And it was enough to make anyone lose hope. Even if he did gain it back, if he found that spark and was ready to face the world and all of its atrocities once more, Charles could just do it again. All that he could do now was start over and rebuild New Genosha in secret, because there's safety in secrecy. Professor X had won, and this is the cost. The X-Men are stunned by what they've learned. They hear a voice ringing through their heads, the Professor projecting his consciousness across the planet to speak to them, ordering them to return. There's an anger and a sternness in his voice that Kitty has never heard before. They fly the Blackbird back to the mansion, and Charles is furious with them. He gave them deliberate orders to stay in the shadows, to not draw attention to themselves. And what did they do? They terrorized a city in Madripoor, started a prison riot, and worst of all, they lied to him about it. Clearly, this new era for the X-Men was a mistake. The newly recruited Laura and Kurt are welcome to the school, or they could return to their old lives if they choose to, and the rest of them are to return to their dorms and to stay there until further notice. He will deal with the Magneto threat himself. The team leaves him to his own devices, but one person remains, Scott Summers. I know that the mind wipe idea has been brought up by a lot of people in the past as a way to explain where the mutants and the X-Men are, but I've never seen it framed in a negative light. It's a dilemma that I don't see happening in the comics and can only be explored through this very specific case of coming into the MCU. The thought of completely erasing a culture like that. And that's something I really want to focus on. Really hammer home that while he had good intentions, as he always does, that it was the wrong thing to do, and he literally set back mutant kind generations, all in the name of safety. And Scott confronts Charles about it head on. For almost his entire life, Scott looked up to the Professor. He practically worshipped him. Every single thing he did since the day they met was for him. He had so much anger, so many expectations on him to be the perfect leader, and he shouldered that burden because he thought it would mean that he would gain the Professor's respect. But Scott realizes now Charles isn't the person he thought he was, that he didn't have all the answers. He's wrong about mutants, he's wrong about the X-Men, and he's wrong about him. Scott lays into him about this. He takes off his jacket and tosses it on the ground, revealing a bright blue and yellow suit underneath before turning to walk away. Charles asks just where does he think he's going. Scott says the Sentinels are being activated in 6 hours. You made me a leader, so I'm going to lead. You will not run around playing hero using my X-Men. Scott glares at the Professor, his visor glowing red. They're not your X-Men anymore, Charles. And Scott slams the door, leaving the Professor all alone. Laura sits in one of the X-Mansion's rooms. At first it seems like all the others, but she knows it's special. It's faint after decades and decades since he was last there, but there's no mistaking it. She can smell him. This is where her father used to stay. She ends up finding a duffel bag buried behind one of the shelves. Inside is a bottle of old scotch, some cigars, and a yellow cowl. Laura holds the Wolverine mask in her hands and the legacy that her father built before her. There's a small knock, and Gambit stands in the doorway. Raimi tells her what's going on, that Summers is going against the Professor and said to ready the Blackbird. They're going to DC to put a stop to the Sentinels, and she's welcome to tag along if she wants, unless that is, she still prefers hiding in the shadows. Laura hesitates for a moment and looks down again at her father's mask. No, I want them to see the Wolverine coming. We cut to Kitty in her room. She's on the phone with her mom, who she hasn't spoken to in weeks. Her mom can tell that something is wrong, and Kitty tells her the whole story. She clearly doesn't understand anything about what's going on. All she knows is that her daughter is upset, but she offers to come and take her back home, for things to go back to how they were, to be normal again. Ever since she got her powers, that's what Kitty's been looking for people to finally treat her like they used to. But when she hears it out loud, it almost hurts even more. Before she can respond, there's a knock on the door. She answers to see Scott wearing not his usual black leather, and he tosses her a costume made of bright yellow and black spandex. Come on, kid, we got a job to do. She looks down at the suit, running her fingers through the fabric and the big red emblem along the belt. It wasn't just a costume, it was a symbol, a promise. And finally, it clicks for her, what the X-Men are meant to be. They don't exist to fight other mutants, they don't exist to make the humans accept them. They exist for other mutants to accept themselves, as a beacon of hope to show that things are going to be okay. And that's the only thing that matters. Things will never go back to normal. She'll never have a regular life again. But for the first time in a while, she doesn't want that. In fact, she's embraced it. She's embraced that things are always going to be weird. Things are always going to be different. Things are always going to be a little bit uncanny. We cut to the next day in Washington, D.C. as Senator Kelly prepares for the live demonstration of the Sentinel program. There are over a dozen working prototypes, each from one of their factories all around the world and standing at 20 feet tall. Journalists and reporters, and more importantly, weapons manufacturers from all over have gathered to see Trask and Kelly's response to the mutant menace. Even his wife and 8-year-old son are there to support him. On a rooftop above, we see the X-Men scouting the perimeter, but they're too late and the Sentinel presentation begins. Kelly announces that Trask will power on the first Sentinel prototype. They've all been equipped with the most advanced weaponry, as well as Trask Industries' X-Gene detector, patent pending, with the ability to detect mutants and put a stop to them before they become a threat. The Sentinel powers on, and the crowd applauds the sheer feat of engineering, and its eyes immediately glow red. The machine scans across the crowd of people, trying to locate the holder of the X-Gene before locking onto its target, Senator Kelly's son. Kelly tries to put a stop to the machine, but Trask says once it's been activated, it can't be stopped. That's how they were designed. The giant robot raises its foot and with a powerful thud, stomps on Kelly and his family. The crowd's panic becomes a dead silence. The Sentinel lifts its foot to confirm the kill, but there's nothing there. And Kitty Pryde rises from the ground, clutching the family in her arms, completely unharmed. Joining her by her side is Cyclops, Storm, Gambit, Nightcrawler, and Wolverine, the X-Men. Their appearance leads to the remaining Sentinels being activated, and the X-Men face off against the 20-foot-tall robots. And this is the chance to show how much everyone's evolved over the movie, their teamwork, and their abilities. We get to see Scott's leadership skills in action. Maybe Kitty's able to go in and out of Sentinels, grabbing vital components and taking them apart piece by piece. Nightcrawler is teleporting innocent civilians away from the fight, and we see people realize that he's not the one that they should be afraid of. Fuck it, maybe Laura and Gambit do that thing from X-Men 97, that shit was sick. But most importantly, Storm is finally able to feel the full extent of her strength, the amount of pure power that she's been forced to hold back all this time, but not anymore. She's magnificent. It's who she is, a goddess. They fight off the Sentinels, but still it's not enough. The sheer strength and numbers is too much for them. They're able to take down all but one before a fleet of DODC drones flies in and handcuffs each and every one of them one by one. The final Sentinel, broken and damaged, but still just as dangerous, slowly makes its way over to the X-Men, the ground rumbling with each step as it prepares for the killing blow. That's when there's a metallic hum. The drones crumble like paper, and the handcuffs fly off the X-Men's wrists, shattering into pieces, and a shadow looms in the sky. Magneto floating down from above, his cape billowing in the wind, but he's not alone. There's a figure floating next to him on a metal platform, Charles Xavier. We flash back to earlier that day. After Scott and Charles's fight, as Scott slams the door behind him, Charles all alone with nothing but his own thoughts. Maybe Scott was right. He had spent his whole life trying to protect them, to protect all of them, but now he wasn't sure if he had anything left to protect. Back in Genosha, all the way on the other side of the world, we see Magneto take off his helmet and place it down on a table beside him. And once again, Charles is able to sense his old friend. The world around Magneto goes dark, and we see the professor speaking to him telepathically. Eric asks what he wants. After everything that's happened, everything he's lost, what more can the great Professor X take from him? Charles is quiet for a moment before saying, "Magneto, you were right." The core of some of the greatest X-Men stories has been about the relationship between Professor X and Magneto and the colliding of extremes. There's been this argument made that they each represent two sides of the civil rights movement, with Charles being an allegory for Martin Luther King Jr. and Magneto representing Malcolm X. And while that may have somewhat been the original intent, I think that this comparison is sort of half-baked, because it boils not just the characters but these two great historical men into caricatures of peace versus violence, when in reality they agreed more often than not, and that narrative was primarily created to smooth out their images and vilify any calls for social justice. But I do believe that the Xavier and Magneto relationship is all about the push and pull of absolutes, with the perfect path for mutant liberation only being possible with them both. And part of the drama of these two characters is that every single time they start to come to an agreement, it always gets ripped away from us. But in recent years, the comics have been having Charles and Magneto truly working together in the stories that come from that teamwork. And so now, after nearly 20 years of these two diametrically opposed ideologies in the movies, yet both with valid points and arguments that have the same common goal, the protection of their people, I say now let's move on from the past. Look to the future. Let's see them work together. Charles apologizes for what he did all those years ago. He thought he was helping. He thought it was the right choice, that he was protecting their people from extinction. But now he knows he was wrong, and all he was doing was protecting himself from more pain. But he's promising to make it right. Charles reaches his hand out to Magneto, and Magneto reaches back, but he stops himself. He can't let himself feel that again. Feel that hope. In my life, I have seen the horrors of man tenfold, and I am tired, Charles. Tired of fighting, tired of the pain, of seeing children die in front of my eyes. I know you are, my friend. That's why you won't be alone. We will fight this, and we will win together. We cut back to Magneto as the Sentinel charges a beam aimed directly at him. He looks down at the ground to see Charles, but also Kitty Pryde. Her eyes still so full of hope even now. This girl, the future of what mutants can be, what his people can become. A reason to keep fighting. He opens his fist and piece by piece the Sentinels disassembled, each screw and component and panel taken apart in an instant. The Sentinels are defeated and the X-Men stands over the rubble, the legacy of the old, but also the promise of a better future. As the dust begins to settle, the remaining crowd is silent, looking upon this team of uncanny heroes, before Charles speaks up to not just the crowd and the cameras, but to the entire planet who's watching. My name is Professor Charles Xavier, founder of the Xavier Home for Gifted Youngsters, and these are my students. Today's events are the result of Senator Kelly's violent rhetoric and Bolivar Trask's dangerous machines. And if not for our intervention, everyone in the vicinity, including Senator Kelly and his family, would have been killed. As he speaks, we see the rest of the world watching. Heroes, villains, those who support the movement and those who don't, as well as glimpses at other mutants themselves. A look to the future. Logan, proud of what his daughter has become. A man made out of pure metal. A boy with green skin. A blue shape-shifting hand. And a woman with a white streak in her hair. We cut to an island, one that's been entirely untouched by man. But it's not just that. There's something about it. Not just the plants or the animals, but the island itself. Like it's alive. Deep beneath the surface, we see a figure trapped in stasis. Jean Grey, alive, frozen in time for all of these years, ready to rise again from the ashes. But there's something else, something lurking in the darkness, something sinister. And we cut back to Charles. I now would like to deliver a message directly to mutant kind. I have failed you in the past, done things and made decisions that I thought were for the best, and for that, I am sorry. To whomever may be watching, you are not alone. In times like these, when the world fears us, hates us, wants to exterminate us, all because we were born something that they do not understand and do not choose to understand, I know we are hurting. I know we are tired, but there is still hope. The only thing we can rely on is each other, to love one another, to hold each other, and to protect each other. Do not succumb to the pain and the nihilism. Do not let them push us to the shadows or forget who we are. That's how we win. Through love, community, and pride. My name is Charles Xavier. I am a mutant and proud, and we are the new. But let me know down below what you want to see from the X-Men in the MCU. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Special thanks to Elijah Wakefield, Anz, Aksu, Cabbage Boy, Cassidy, Calvin Brown, Carol Ann Brenneman, Chicken McDoofus, Dan, Danny Boy, Eden Kenna, Egan McFarlane, Evan Bowers, Fastest Man Dead, Finn Yates, Hannessy, Harper Sires, Howard Bell, If You Know You Know, Iron Ninja, Jake Selig, Kai Dud, Ken, Leo Stringer, Melody Dreamer, Glass Bear Productions, Morpy, Murren09, Popcorn Eater 123, Raptor77, Rylan Archuleta, Sav, Sherbet, Spectacular Clyde, TDW Fan, Theo Crouch, Tim Neufeld, Choices by Erasers Lame, Tyler Girdrich, and Yesh Kapoor for being spectacular fanboys on my Patreon. Be responsible, and I will see you around.